I would like to call this April 16th board meeting to order. First item for approval are the minutes of the March 19th, 2014 board meeting. Could I get an approval of that, please, first?
So approved.
A second?
A second.
Perfect. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Vicki. Reports to the board. Stefan and Tycee is not here?
Yes.
Stefan.
Good evening. So for student government, we're electing the new senators for next year tomorrow. And then, so we're excited for that. There's 22 applicants and 12 spots, so it's going to be pretty interesting. Then the following week, we're going to elect the executive board for next year. And so for the next board meeting, I'm planning on bringing the future president and the person who would serve as the ex officio to the meeting to introduce to you. And those are the big things that are happening right now. So yeah, looking forward to that and the SOAR banquet on next Tuesday. So
I think many of us will be there, so thank you very
Yeah.
much. We're saving the place at the table.
okay.
Are there any questions from the board members? Thank you, Stefan. You've been great. We'll be at your graduation. Staff Senate, Amy.
Hello, everyone. So I think in the last couple weeks, if I could definitely sum up one word from staff, it would be still. We were all very still since the last board meeting and the policies and procedures that were approved. Everyone is kind of just sitting and waiting to see what's going to happen from here. There's not a lot of motivation or encouragement to do anything outside of their job duties. I'm doing my best as staff senate president to try and coordinate some events and some things just to kind of get the momentum going back again. But I've heard from both faculty and staff that there's definitely a change in atmosphere on campus. And I hope that, you know, throughout these next couple months and with the employee banquet coming up and the employee picnic, we can start to change that. But I think it's going to take a big effort from a lot of people, a lot of levels on campus, from staff all the way up to administration, to kind of bring staff back up to feeling valued, appreciated, and respected. And that's something I've heard even as I came through the doors this morning or this evening into CCI. They're not feeling that, certainly anymore. So that's certainly something I wanted to bring up, and that's what I'll be working on these next couple months. Aside from everything else going on, I think that's the most important. And again, that comes from all of us. Any questions? Thank you all.
Excuse me.
Yes,
Please, Don.
Amy, I don't have a question,
sure.
but I certainly applaud your observation that there needs to be some attention to whatever the stagnant situation is that we have, if there is that stagnant as you indicated. And I hope that you continue to address that in a positive way. And if there are areas that come up that you think that we should know about, both on the positive as well as the negative, I certainly would like to hear it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don. You kind of stole words out of my mouth. And I'm sorry that things are not very happy down there right now, but if there's anything that we can help with, please let us know.
I think we're clear what we need, but we'll move on from here.
Right. We have to start from today.
Absolutely, and that's what I'm emphasizing, is to not sit and just wallow in it, to move forward
Right.
and learn from it and be better for it. And if, since there have been discussions that we can review these again, absolutely, we will continue to push that come next year around this time. Perhaps staff senate can bring that on the agenda.
And I'm hoping that most of the board members will be there at the recognition dinner.
I hope so as well.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ed.
I wonder if you have any perceptions about
if staff would be willing to share information regarding some of the things that they may have felt in terms of process that could have been improved, that would have, irrelevant of the outcome. I guess I'm asking, was the process good, bad, mediocre? I would just ask if there's something on that. I, as a board member, would appreciate knowing that.
I had not honestly heard anything about the process. Several staff members did say that they appreciated the multiple opportunities with the open forums, both throughout Staff Senate, EA, and with Faculty Senate. They also appreciated the multiple discussions on Ecosci, as well as the extended opportunities to provide feedback. So I did not hear, to my remembering, anything on the process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Faculty Senate, Rob, please.
Thank you. I have a fairly quick report tonight, I think. We are doing our best to move on from the HR policies. That was a big issue. Now that that's settled. Advising is coming up. We are meeting with Judy Hay and Catherine Flewelling. And I hope they bring some advisors too with Faculty Senate. We're going to have a discussion. We've made some proposals for modifications to their holistic advising model, and I'm sure we can come to some agreement and hash that out. In addition, the next big topic I think that Faculty Senate is going to be tackling is the workload and job description and rank issues that are coming up for faculty. Originally, Dr. Fierro and Dr. Schaefer wanted this completed by the end of the school year, but we have gotten their assurance that if we can come to some agreement by early in the fall, that would be sufficient. And so we're going to start now, and I would doubt that we'll have much completed or arrive at a final agreeable policy or procedure by the end of this semester. It is tentatively, our plan is Faculty Senate to get the groundwork done on that and to have an assembly of all the faculty in the fall, much like we did with the HR issues and things like that. So that's where we're at.
Thank you, Rob.
Madam
Oh,
Chair.
any questions? Trustee Moe.
Rob, appreciate your comments, and I was wondering, can you tell me just a little bit as to what you perceive as being the issues that are outstanding regarding workload, and in particular, do you know, or is there discussion about specific changes? What's up with faculty on that?
Well, as a starting point, Dr. Fierro has given job descriptions and a ranking proposal, and has made it very clear it's a draft and it's just a starting point. It appears to most faculty anyway at first reading that the list of expected duties of faculty are so extensive, including being members of professional organizations and things like this, that and we're not real clear if that is required of all faculty or if only appropriate for certain faculty, and it's just mostly right now the wording and the intent that we need to flesh out. As far as workload, or I should say most of the concern from faculty is concerning the both the credit for the student and then the credit for the faculty against their workload for labs and clinicals and things like that. I'm really not in an academic area that has labs and clinicals and things like that, but those instructors who do would like some more clarification and some maybe changes to that. So I think that's going to be the major part of the workload policy. There are some faculty who are upset that there's an 18-hour cap on the amount that faculty are supposed to teach. They would like to teach more than that a semester. And there are faculty who are teaching more than that a semester, as the needs of the college make it so. But there are faculty who would like to teach more and are told that they cannot. And so that, I think, is going to be a topic of discussion. Can't think of much anything else. Oh, I might say on the rank, I did a survey of faculty, all full-time faculty, I did not include adjuncts, and asked them if, a simple question, are you in favor of rank, yes or no? And 38% were no, 38% said yes, they were in favor of rank, 51% said no, they are not, and 11 were undecided. So I don't-
Excuse me, could I stop you just for
Sure.
1 minute? Because maybe some of us don't understand rank.
Well, originally in the HR policies, there was a large section in there about rank, including instructor, associate professor,
Okay,
assistant
okay,
professor,
got it.
professor,
Right.
trustee professor.
Okay, got it.
And we really didn't want that in the HR policies, and so Dr. Fierro and Dr. Schaefer agreed that we would take it out of the HR policies and make it a separate policy. And Dr. Fierro has proposed a ranking system with those titles, not tied to contract or to HR issues, but rather just through title. Perhaps down the line, the intent was to tie it maybe to pay, or when the pay compensation model is revisited, I think that's coming up in the fall, isn't it, Joe? At least that's what you've been threatening. But as a standalone policy. And so, and those are really three different issues, the workload, the job description, and the faculty rank. But the Senate wants to tackle them because they're so closely related that we'd like to just roll up our sleeves and get on all three of them.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Did you want to continue, or would you like
No, I'm,
trustee Kilty to ask his question at this time?
You just stated the results of a survey. What was
Yeah.
the response rate on that survey?
pretty poor. We had 61 faculty respond out of 100 and I believe 13 full-time faculty, so a little bit more than half responded.
Why do you think that is? Is that a common thing that people don't respond, or is it just this survey?
You know, I can speculate, and it would be just that. If you would like me to, I will.
Please.
I think that the timing of it, coming on the heels of the HR issue, the people were just burned out. They just weren't reading emails concerning anything else. They've expended enough energy on that, that it just wasn't on their radar.
Okay.
And I think that that there is a significant portion of faculty, how much I don't know, that just really doesn't care about rank. They care about the HR policies and the pay scale and the workload and the job description, but as far as rank, they just could care less one way or another. And didn't want to have to open up a survey to say, I'm undecided.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? If not, thank you very much.
Yep.
Appreciate you coming.
Madam Chair, just an observation.
Yes.
If that percentage responded, a little over 50% responded, or right around that, that's pretty consistent with voting practices, isn't it?
That's a good observation. I think these online surveys, they could just make them so much easier, I think. If we didn't have to put in our username and our password and all that stuff, it'd be so much easier.
They can't complain because it wasn't user-friendly. I sent them an
No,
email.
no, I'm kidding.
It said yes or no.
Hey, that was easy.
Yeah, one radio button they had to click in.
I want to take your next survey. Thank you. The LCCC Education Association, do I see anyone here representing them? I don't think so. So thank you. Next, we have the President's Report. Dr. Schaefer?
Yep, Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm going to go to the podium just
to warm it up for the budget presentation. If I may. Thank you. Typically, I let you know that my update will be brief. I don't want to lie to you outright tonight, so I will try to keep it as brief as I can. But I've been thinking about some things and really want to take an opportunity to share a couple of perspectives and highlight some of the good work that's happening here at the college. I had the privilege last week, I think it was last week, of going to Washington, D.C. with a group of folks from LCCC here, Dr. Fierro, Vice President Hay, Tanya Griffith, Dave Curry, Ann Murray, whom I'm missing, Stacy Mestis, Catherine Flewelling. We try to take a group of people every year to the AACC National Convention because it allows us the opportunity to sort of step out of the day-to-day, got to get the work done here at the college and step into a much larger venue where community colleges come together and you start to see and understand what's really becoming the pressure on community colleges. What are the major initiatives? Who's dealing with what? Interact and see the diversity of what we do. And so we like to fondly joke it's getting some of our employees and faculty and staff to go and drink the community college Kool-Aid, but it really is an immersion activity for our folks, and it's one of those things that budget willing we'll continue to do year after year. Not too long ago, and if you remember, those of you that were in Seattle for the ACCT Congress, you heard a little bit about this, but AACC released what was called the Reclaiming the American Dream. I think it was actually 2 years ago, and it was sort of a landmark report that essentially identified what are the major shifts that we need to see in community colleges for us to thrive and be successful into the future. And for those of you that heard my State of the College address 2 years ago, I talked a little bit about some of these fundamental shifts, and one of the big ones is the shift from access to completion and what's going on. This year, they released an implementation guide. So after their work, that essentially says, okay, those are our big recommendations. Those are the things we need to do to re-envision the community college of the future. And they released an implementation guide, which actually goes through and talks about, okay, here are the goals from our 21st century Reclaiming the Dream. Here's what we know now about what it's going to take to achieve those goals, and what are some of the emerging best practices and high-performing practices. And there were many threads throughout the convention that really dealt with those types of things. And so it was timely, and it was really good for us on many levels, because it really started to illustrate how the things that we're doing, especially those folks we were able to bring that are sort of, they're in the classroom, they're working day and day with students, trying to get things done, for them to see this broader connection of what we're doing and why we're doing it and how it relates to community colleges across the U.S. Another thing that was real timely was a point of view article that you should all have a copy of it within your materials. It's by Dr. Byron McClenny. He's fond of joking about that he's not the famous McClenny. If you've ever heard of Kay McClenny, she's the director of the Center for Community College Student Engagement. And they put out the CESI, the SENSE, and some of the major surveys that community colleges are using to drive their improvement. Byron has actually quite distinguished himself, retired from the University of Texas at Austin, a longtime leader in the Achieving the Dream initiatives, and really an exceptional educator and champion for change. And his point of view in the Community College Week, I thought really hit some threads for us, and I just want to talk a little bit about it, because first off, the one thing that he has said is something that we've been talking about, and I'll say off and on. It's not that we don't know what we need to do to improve, it's whether or not we actually have the willpower to do it. And so as we oftentimes grapple with and argue about what's the best approach and why should we do this and how should we do that and how do we know, the mountain of evidence and support for some of the major things that community colleges need to do to shift our focus from just access to actually access and completion is really starting to be supported by evidence. And we have these series of now they call high-performing practices or best practices, and now promising practices, those that are high-performing that have the literature behind them to say we know they work. Those that are emerging or promising practices are ones we think, but they're still a little bit new. But one of the things he did here, and I want to kind of walk through a few slides just with, based off of his point of view, is say, look, here's the things that we know we need to be doing if we're going to shift our overall focus towards student success and completion and actually thrive into the future under this paradigm shift. And I found it interesting, and I still may send this out to the entire campus because it was sort of reaffirming to step back and see that something that's being written by a national community college leader in a national venue sort of out there ties almost through the entirety of his point of view to the work that we're doing here. And so I just wanted to walk through that a little bit and talk about it. One of the first things that he states, and I've highlighted certain key areas in here for you so you can kind of see where I'm going through, is that we have to move to a culture of evidence and away from a culture of anecdote and emotion. We have the tools now and the data now to start looking at what happens at our campuses strategically, longitudinally, and actually over time to understand what's happening with our students. And so one of the things that I thought, okay, well, how are we doing that here? And how have we shifted to do that at LCCC? One of the big ones is our key performance indicators, and those numerous measures and metrics that we're using to track students and other key data points that really drive at how well we're doing as an institution. And so you see the things like retention rates, graduation rates, transfer rates, successful completions in key courses like developmental education and then the first college level course after that. Internal measures like time to degree, credits towards completion. Looking at those things, we're doing that now, and we really have a strong handle on where we're going with the use of our data to drive institutional improvement and many of the other things that we're doing. Anne Murray's been out doing KPI forums and really engaging. I'm actually pleased to see a broad audience engaging with this conversation about key performance indicators. We're also looking at actually cohort tracking in ways that we haven't in the past. Historically, we have tracked, and we've tracked this because IPEDS, because the National Center for Education Statistics says you have to, is a very limited cohort. It's our first time, full-time students. And so our graduation rates that you see are based on a cohort of, for us, it's about, 300 students of first-time, full-time students, and then we have some that are first-time, part-time students. Well, we know that we serve a whole lot of returning students, adult students, students that have transferred that aren't looked at. So we're shifting the way we're looking at cohort tracking and looking at entering students. So all of those students that come to us and actually moving them through. Are they engaging in orientation? Are they moving through? Are they finishing developmental education? Are they coming back fall to spring, fall to fall? Do they earn credits towards their degree? And ultimately, do they complete? So we're really doing that. We're using the survey tools in ways we never have for many years. We've been offering the SESI and the SENSE and some of the other surveys. We collect those data, we get the report, and they go on a shelf. They're now integrated in our KPIs. We have faculty that are actually taking the SESI benchmarks and having conversations with their peers about what can we do to improve our ranking on each of these benchmarks and understand what they're doing. And so we're not completely there yet, but boy, we sure are doing a lot of trying to move towards a culture of evidence, making evidence-informed, data-informed decisions, and looking at that strategically, even where it's hard to look at, and saying, look, we've got an issue there, how do we address that? This one isn't new, but he goes on to talk about how we need to focus on this shift of assessing student learning. And some of you have heard me talk about this. But we need to develop a true quality assurance model in higher education. We talk about quality, we worry about quality, we worry about compromising quality, but when you get right down to it and asking how do we assess and evaluate and even define quality, there really is only one way of doing that, in my opinion, and that is setting high standards of student achievement that we can help students consistently meet. Those standards are student learning outcomes. Right now we use grades, we use basic testing, those types of things, but in terms of actually identifying what is quality, we have to say quality is helping students demonstrate what we want them to be able to demonstrate. And I would say that higher education is very much behind the times in figuring out a way to implement. But we're making some great headway here. This past year, what we've done in revamping and really digging into our institutional competencies, the development of criterion rubrics with proficiency levels, and tying those to our technology, like our desire to learn in the analytics package, and making sure that we're structuring our curriculum so we have common assessments across courses that feed into that. I think for the first time as we wrap up this year and certainly go into fall, we'll have tangible student learning data across the spectrum of our students on our institutional competencies that are really going to guide how we do improvement in our courses. We have an entirely new process to our curriculum, and many of you have probably heard as our faculty kind of tackle moving courses into this new master course outline of record. There's some key elements with that. We're mapping course outcomes to institutional outcomes, or course competencies to institutional competencies. We're seeking common assessments across the course sections so we can actually get a handle on whether or not students are achieving what we need to have them achieve. And really pushing that focus away from just what are we teaching to what our students are learning. And as you know, we're getting ready to acquire and implement a new technology solution. We've chosen Campus Labs as that solution that will actually be able to house and facilitate our student learning assessment plans, our institutional planning. But we're not there yet, but boy, we have made major strides this past year to really focus on what we're doing. The Gen Ed work that you'll be hearing about here in the next couple of meetings, and really a focus on a competency-based or an outcomes-based general education framework, has shifted our thinking away from what classes do you take to what do students need to be able to demonstrate. And then we figure out the best educational approach to help them build that competency. Carefully designed planning. He talks about carefully designed planning, which includes strategic vision, priorities for the future, operational plans, the allocation and reallocation of resources. And you know this, we have a new strategic plan, new vision statement, new mission statement, and values, our 4 broad goals. All of these, as you're going to hear in a little bit, are integrated into how we're developing our budget, how we're looking at human resource prioritization, how we're allocating one-time only funds, and really trying to drive the things we're doing from that plan, and really making a good move. Our budget process, again, as you're going to hear about, it continues to improve. I was very pleased with how it came together this year, and again, how we've connected our vision, our goals, and all of those things to how we're strategically allocating our resources. And one project I want you to be aware of that's in development, it's actually, I think, on my plate, I have some work to do, is we're working with Julie Gersner, the business analyst in student services, who has some expertise with her time at Mattel Toys, in developing an LCCC project management process. We have all these things that are going on. Some of them are very major projects, some of them are smaller projects. We want a consistent structure to how we design those activities, how we lead those activities, how we track the progress of those activities, and how we evaluate how well we do those activities. And that's coming together and will give us sort of a common language as we look at all the things that we're doing here, and really holds a lot of promise for our campus. McClenny talks a lot about organizational structures, staffing patterns, what we're doing with curriculum development and scheduling and all of those things. And just to go through some of the brief history, you know, we've had a significant reorganization here at the college. Tried to focus that on how it creates coherence specifically from a student success perspective, and also looking for efficiency in our operations. Again, work to do there still, but really moving in that direction and thinking about how the organization is structured to help students succeed. You're well aware of the policy and procedure overhaul that we're going through. And while you've heard the HR ones are certainly on people's minds still, there are some other major changes that we've gone through and are going through. Your governance shift, and what we've done there to structure that to make sure the board is engaged in the operations of the institution and is aware, and that we have that dynamic between me as your employee and you as the board. What we're doing with our academic policies and structures, the degrees and certificates, you'll see the Gen Ed one, the things we're doing with enrollment management, and some of those things. We're looking at this from a policy structure perspective, again, geared towards student success. We've got, for the second year, an objective process that we use to prioritize human resource needs and job requests. And again, it improves every year, but we're using the strategic plan and key tools to try to get at least an objective analysis to sort of prioritize and rank what we think are the needs for our institution that are driving some great conversations. And then some major academic program changes, curriculum updates. You'll hear this term pathway over and over again, and you'll see it in Byron's point of view article here as well, and we're working on those things. He talks about, and this is a hot topic across the board, I probably don't need to spend a whole lot of time on it, and that's really re-examining the way we do developmental or remedial education, preparing students to succeed. We are making great progress, and in fact, I think I have a meeting next week to hear an update on what we're doing with the redesign of our developmental English program. As you've heard, some of our faculty, like Arceline Nisley, have had some great success with sort of tinkering with the design and delivery of our English courses. They've actually gone out, visited multiple leading institutions, and are actually trying to accelerate the implementation of this, I think, for fall. So some great work there. We're making progress with the math redesign and the curriculum. They're talking. They had a good meeting just yesterday, I think, looking at multiple pathways, really challenging the question about whether or not the pre-calculus or college algebra should be the default pathway, or if we should be looking at statistics and multiple pathways. I think we're going to get some ground. And one of the things we'll be working on here in the near future is a much more robust way in which we place students into college courses, instead of just using the ACT or the Compass test. So really making some progress there as well. Engaging and developing faculty, you'll start to see this emerge over and over and over again, that you can't do this without engaging and developing your faculty and your staff. And while we'll continue to work through whatever we need to work through, I don't want anything to overshadow the significant impact that we have had with the Center of Teaching and Learning this year. And in fact, until I read some of the updates and what they're doing, I wasn't even aware of the impact that they have. We developed for the first time and had the first new faculty learning cohort. That will be that first experience that builds relationships and bonds. The things we know that are good for our students are also good for our new faculty, and continue to do through that. Implemented a continuous improvement academy with targeted professional development opportunities for our faculty. Starting this fall, we'll have an adjunct boot camp to actually get in and work with our adjunct faculty in ways we haven't done as an institution before. Or coordinating the student learning assessment and working with the MCORE process you'll hear about. Worked with our in-service, developing an institution-wide faculty development plan. They're helping with our curriculum redesign. Working right now on a certification program for our faculty, especially our developing faculty, how to successfully teach online and actually certify that. And what we envision is multiple certifications along the provisional faculty process in their first 4 years. So when they get to the time of continuing contract application, we've got a ready-made portfolio with demonstrated ability, certified, that can become part of that. And so the things they're doing, they're leading the training for College Studies 1000. I'll talk about that in a second. And really, as always, a recognition when you have the opportunity to come and be invited to present, in this case at NISOD, really a community college faculty-oriented conference to talk about what we're doing. It's reaffirming. So, like I say, I'm outstandingly impressed by what those faculty have done and what the instructional consultants and the two gals that are in there have done this year. And then Byron talks about the student experience and looking at the student success pathway from the first time they engage with you until they actually leave. And what are the things we need to be doing and know we need to be doing as students engage. And it keeps coming out there. We need to be making sure students go through orientation. Byron's wife, Kay, is fond of always saying students don't do optional. If you say it's optional, they don't do it. And you heard, I think, before your last board meeting, for the first time, we will have mandatory orientation for our students coming in for fall of 2014. The new holistic advising model, this is coming up over and over and over, recognizing there needs to be greater coherence with the way we advise students. And it's not just advising them on course taking. It runs the spectrum. It requires multiple individuals at the campus engaging in an advising model. And so part of that model will actually be developing a student academic plan. When they start with us, every student will have an academic plan on file that we will look at least on a yearly basis, but most likely on a semesterly basis, that says this is what I need to do to complete my credential at LCCC, and maps that path out for them. So there's no question for us about where a student is and no question for a student. And what that will do to be able to drive our planning, drive our course scheduling, and drive our students in terms of their focus will be impressive. I mentioned this in the previous slide, our College Studies 1000 Intro to College Success first year seminar. This is one of those, it's not a promising practice, it's a high impact practice. And it's demonstrated that when you engage students early on in their education in a formalized, structured learning environment that helps them build relationships, become exposed and understand the resources of higher education, learn how to talk higher education, focus on developing career plans and career goals. Starting this fall, any student that comes to us who has not picked a program will take this seminar, and the goal by the time they're done is they will have chosen a program of study. Because the research is clear, those students that choose a program of study are much more likely to complete than those that aren't. And I can show you the LCCC data for our undeclared students and how we lose them rapidly when they don't choose a program of study. So that's great, and so many more program pathways, boot camps, pre-semester boot camps, placement test prep courses, meta majors, and so much more that we're doing to sort of engage and really make sure students make it through that entire student success continuum, and we don't lose them where we're losing them right now. So I apologize for taking so much time, but in the heat of all the conversation we've been having here in the past, it really helped me, and I hope it helped you to step back and say, there is method to our madness, and we are making progress, and what we're doing is really in line with what we are hearing and what we are reading and what we are seeing. And you know, ultimately, you'll hold me accountable to it, and we'll see how things turn out at graduation time this year. But I firmly believe we are on the right path and really making some excellent progress in a relatively short amount of time. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions or sit down.
Madam Chair?
Trustee Kelty.
Joe, I've read this article myself, and he was talking mostly about gathering data and looking for evidence, and I have nothing against a culture of evidence. I think that's great. So I'm fine with that. Planning, I'm fine with that. But you know what? There are basic things that we could do around this campus that have nothing to do with planning or culture of evidence that we've managed to fall down on every semester. So I'm going to talk about just 5 things here. Number 1, vetting adjuncts, making sure that people teaching classes have at least some expertise or an adequate amount of expertise in a subject, and that they end up actually teaching the bloody class. That's something we fall down on all the time. Monitoring what's going on in classes, not necessarily in real time, but at least through the semester, because when we run into problems late in the semester, and it is hard to fix things at that point. We run into that problem very often. Building learning communities was one of the things you talked about in here, but we did a disservice to learning communities on this campus, in my opinion, when we banished students throughout the day from the cafeteria. That was the place where students on this campus had traditionally gotten together to work in groups, and they had no real replacement. So that was you know, just self-inflicted damage that I think we should have been able to see and avoid. You talked about remedial ed, and I applaud the efforts in English. There were 3 guys down in math who I thought were making adequate progress toward that there, and you know, they got the rug kind of pulled out from under their feet, I thought precipitously. I don't think it was necessarily warranted, and it seemed to be agitated by various people on the campus. It was more of a personal score than anything substantive to back them up. And then the business about stat versus algebra, I'll just make a quick point here. If you can't do algebra, you can't do statistics. And algebra is the gateway to all mathematics, and I know that is becoming an unpopular view, but it's been known pretty well since the Arabs invented algebra 1,400 years ago. So with that, I'll let that go.
Well, Madam Chair and Dr. Kilty, I appreciate that. Let me hit on a few things. So one of the things, as we're using data, one of the things we're going to get at, and this kind of goes back to my quality comment, and this scares the heck out of people, so this isn't an intent to shock people that are out there, is we have the data to look at trends in student success within courses. And in fact, the commission and the legislature, as you'll hear in a few minutes, are looking at that, what's happening in success in student courses. We have the ability and are going to start looking at success in certain courses, success between adjunct versus full-time faculty, success rates between different types of faculty to help guide continuous improvement. So while we have, again, those anecdotes, I don't know that I have the evidence yet to demonstrate that our adjuncts courses succeed at any lesser rate than our full-time faculty succeed. and we can get those data. But the other thing, without common assessments across the curriculum, I don't know whether or not an A in an adjunct class is really equivalent to an A in a full-time faculty's class, or what the difference is between an A and a B even in one-time class. Until we know and set these are the expectations for a student in terms of this is what we want them to demonstrate, and have a way to assess that across delivery modalities and cross instructor types, it's hard really to compare what it is. And so, yeah, we have some valid anecdotes in terms of people coming to us and saying we have complaints with this here, but in general, in terms of whether or not our adjunct faculty perform at a greater or lesser rate than our full-time faculty and what the difference is, we don't know. But I've asked Dr. Fierro to start looking at those data and help us target our interventions. And if we find those faculty that seem to be demonstrating excellence in the classroom, students are succeeding, they're demonstrating their competencies, we're going to put them in front of other faculty and say, let's see if we can spread that. The interventions, and early on in the semester, I couldn't agree more. Dr. Fierro is right now working on a plan where we will not, believe it or not, we don't actually post midterm grades. So students don't receive, in general, I believe there's probably some faculty that do this, but we don't post midterm grades across the way. The research is clear that students need to know, and advisors need to know, if students are making adequate, satisfactory academic progress within the first few weeks of class. And if they're not, we need to intervene. So we're going to look at structuring the way we use the grading mechanism and desire to learn, our learning management system, and really the way we provide assessments and provide feedback to students early on, so we can get in early and say what's going on, not so that we wait to the end. On the learning communities, we need to create better spaces for our students. I won't even go there. The developmental education, I don't know that we made all that much progress even last fall in math, and while I'm hopeful we can get there, we're working on it, and it's time that we get something done. And my assessment is that we need to become more engaged with it, and that's what Dr. Fierro and I have done to get there. And I think people are really starting to see and roll up and to move in the right direction. So they're valid points and things we're looking at. And like I said, we've got a lot of work to do yet in this spectrum, but we're on the right track, and I think we'll start to see those results in the outcomes here into the future.
Trustee Mosier, I know you have something for me.
I just wanted to say I read both the items that you shared with us. And on Bumpus, his stuff, you know, I really found it interesting and supportive of what we're doing in community colleges. One of the first things that he talked about was the fact that we need to be redesigning. And I found that that's a good summary of what we've been doing since 45 plus years ago. What we've done here at this college and what we continue to do has been redesigned. It's constantly in a state of redesign. So I give him congratulations that he understands that faculty are constantly redesigning courses, even from one section to the next section, from one day to the next day. So yeah, he's right about that. He said reinvent the instructional role. Again, that's been happening and continues to happen, and I think colleges, and this college has been outstanding in doing that in terms of its evolving approach to how we teach, what we teach. We've had some missteps and failures, but we've learned from those and we keep changing. So Bumpus is right about that. He says we need to reset the system to better promote student success. And I can't help but agree with him. I mean, he talks about equity and academic excellence. And he says we ought to reclaim the American dream. That got me thinking. I said, what the heck is the American dream? I think I know what it is, personally, but I don't know what we could agree on. So, like everybody else, grabbed the iPad, took a look. Random House had an interesting perspective as what the American dream is. Their first one was freedom, equality, and opportunity available to all. That's what we talk about, access to students, access to succeed or fail, but that's an opportunity for them. The second one I really liked, happiness and material comfort. I like that. So what I want to say there is this notion that the American social, economic, and political system makes success possible for every individual is an ideal. And I think he would agree with that. So I think we have to be careful how we look at what we can and cannot do. Too few students are leaving community colleges with credentials and career-ready skills. My goodness, have we ever heard that before? I think we've heard that a lot. We need to improve the completion rates, but, you know, I'm kind of fascinated after attending a session, I thought yes, I did bring that I know Don and you, Brooke, were at, in terms of dental hygiene's pinning ceremony here just last week, right? Or was it this week? I've lost
It was
track of
last
time.
week, 'cause I missed it.
Yeah, last week. And I was impressed with that, as I've been impressed with nursing, dental, auto, diesel, equine. I mean, you can go through a lot of these, but I'm impressed that we have success right here. And I think a lot of times we're wallowing in, I don't know whether I'd call it the dust, the mud, or the dirt, or whatever, but we're wallowing around in not seeing what's in front of us. There's success. We know how to measure it. We've done it. We continue to do it, and we've done it for a number of years in numerous programs here. I'm just absolutely amazed that Bumpus doesn't talk about the fact that we're doing that, and we are successful. I realize it's his job in part to talk about what we're not doing well. But my goodness, I want to toot the horn, scream out there that we're doing some things really right. And when I say we're wallowing in the mud, what I'm saying here is we don't seem to want to take what we know works well in these programs and apply it to others. I do not understand why we can't move forward on that. I mean, it's been known for years, and we keep looking all over when we've got it in front of us. So that's my closing comment for him. I wanted to go back to McClenny's. Culture for change. I don't think you can be in education and not have a culture of change. I do love the idea that you spoke, as you did before, about having data to help us make those decisions, but I think sometimes we have to look beyond the data and say what makes common sense to us, and that's one of the comments that I've mentioned before in here, or alluded to it, and this is from We're Losing Our Minds. The problem is that without higher education without higher learning, higher education is not valuable enough to justify its price unless you're just buying a degree. In which case, a logical and savvy consumer would and should purchase the cheapest one available. Now, in my marketing class, I would have screamed and said, never use the word cheap, because that implies that it's not worthy. I'd have said low cost. But their quote has cheapest one available. So the only thing that's higher about the kind of learning is the cost. And that's what we're seeing today. So I'm concerned about that. We're spending a lot of money on some things we already know, and I think we could take advantage of what we know and not spend that other money. So, yeah.
Great.
I think both these guys have some good ideas, but I would emphasize that we need to holler about what we're doing and doing really well and learn from that.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Mosier, I mean, I couldn't agree more. There are things, and that's really part of this exercise, was to step back and say, wow, you know, there are great things happening here. And it's you know, I enjoy this time of year. It's hectic, I know, but this is the time of year where you see those tangible success stories. You see the Stephen Beckers put on their gown and walk across the stage, and you recognize that even though we get wrapped up in the day-to-day work and the things we want to improve upon, there are everyday success stories that walk out of our doors during commencement time that we need to celebrate, and I couldn't agree with it more. And I think for me, what drives me is not necessarily that we're not doing as well in certain areas of things, but I see that I could have 5 Steffens. Now, there's only one Steffen, so but we could have 5 Steffens. You know, we could have 10 Steffens, and when there's other institutions even in the state that are doing that, knowing it can be done, that compels me to say, to do that, and I think that's the driver. I agree with you completely, and that's the whole point of this, is that it's not that we don't know what we can do to improve. We know it. It's just whether or not we'll do it. We've talked a lot about healthcare programs and the design of our cohort-based healthcare programs, incredibly successful. but there's some unique things about their design. They have competitive processes that basically garner the top students that either because of their academic ability, not always, or their focus and that intestinal fortitude to achieve drives them to be the best students, and get them into those courses. And how do we cultivate and create that momentum, that focus on not just wandering, around and selecting classes, but actually focusing on this is what my goal is, and this is what I want to do. And we see that in these programs when they're goal oriented, they complete. The other one is from a quality perspective, and this is the one that I haven't figured out exactly how to do. We often hold up our healthcare programs. When we talk about assessment, it's always, well, we've been doing that in nursing and hygiene forever. There's one key difference. Somebody else tells them what to assess for, and somebody else developed the benchmark tool to assess what they're doing. And that's your licensing exams, and those are your accreditation guidelines. Once we step out of those programs, who's telling us? Who's actually setting those? And we sort of scramble through. In fact, this is one of the things we're struggling with the mathematics faculty right now is what are the competencies at what level, and how do we know if students achieve those? And whether or not we can develop those or we take something that somebody else has done, I don't know. So that's that struggle is when we know what we need to do, how do we get there? And that's the piece that we're trying to grapple with. So yes, certainly I want to celebrate the great things we're doing and move in there, but where we have opportunity for improvement and really focus on continuous improvement and be able to really employ things we know will work, how do we get there? And that's the struggle we're feeling right now is how do we get to it? And we're trying to do it both incrementally, but at least with enough momentum that we start to see impacts sooner. And that's part of the journey we're under right here. And I don't know how long it'll take us to get there if we will, but that's certainly my hope.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Trustee Mosier.
I'm glad, Dr. Schaefer, you brought that up in terms of other assessments and someone setting out what it is we need to achieve. I think to some degree that's been done for us and done a long time ago. How we measure it becomes the issue that you talked about. And I'll just go back to, again, a key point that's made not just in this but in other literature, and that is that employers consistently, whether they be in business, manufacturing, whether they be in the health occupations, agriculture, it doesn't make any difference. One of the things that consistently we're being told students need to have is critical thinking, problem solving, and a demonstrated sense of accountability. And to me, those employers, and I'll go back to 1972 when I started teaching. I was told that back in 72 as I worked in co-op and set up students to work in various places here in this community. Those were things I heard then, and how did we assess that at that time? I could give you some insights in how we did that. It's nothing grand or new or different because we've been doing it for a long time. But here's what was scary to me also about your question there about assessing. Having a bachelor's degree no longer certifies the graduates that the graduate has any specific qualifications, is capable of achieving any real intellectual depth, possesses basic workplace skills, or demonstrates personal maturity. That's frightening when I read that. And I think, that's something we need to, given all the successes we have, we need to really ask ourselves what's going on there. So, thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Trustee Mosier.
Madam Chair, Trustee Little, you have something?
Did you
to
have
say?
something?
She was scratching.
Okay, hi.
Trustee Erickson.
I'm sorry. I don't wish to prolong this because I think the comments have been really right on. Both Trustee Kilty with his observations of some major concerns there and some of the comments that you made about what we need to see in the outcome aspects of our work. But one observation that comes to me from going to the health occupation pinning for the nurses and also for the dental hygiene, and then seeing how they deal in physical therapy assistance and the other areas. It's a methodology that they use that I think is very, very helpful to the end outcomes, and that is the team learning. They are really into team learning. Now, I don't know how much team learning is in our basic academics, but I just have to make that observation that I was really struck by the short time that I've been here and going to these graduations, the pinnings, and the showing of how proud they were, how they belonged, and how they helped each other achieve difficult benchmarks, and that was team learning. And I think that that is a significant methodology that maybe we need to examine a little bit more if it's not being examined. Maybe it is, I don't know, but I just thought I'd pass that out for one trustee's observation.
Madam Chair, I don't want to extend this, but I just wanted to make clear that when I gave some examples, I didn't just stick with the health, equine, auto body, auto diesel. I mean, that kind of team effort, the group effort is phenomenal that you see in terms of people helping each other. You see that, you know, over the years I saw that in the business area. I'm not sitting here to give accolades to a faculty person behind me, but you know, through various groups, whether it's service learning that involves and puts them together. You see it in SAG, I think. Anytime you're putting people together in the team, as you're talking about, and there's that cohort support, that's where we see a lot of success.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, Trustee Erickson, even though we are prolonging this is a good conversation, and this is what we want you and want to be engaged in the dialogue about is what are we doing in terms of ensuring student success, institutional access, and excellence, and all of those great things. You're right, you know, and one of the fundamental things, and go back to the research, when students build relationships, choose a program of study, and have a coherent pathway, they succeed. They succeed at a much, much higher rate. And so those are the things we keep looking at. And it won't surprise you when we look at now our program analysis. What are the programs that have the highest success rates here? They're the ones that build relationships, have a structured curriculum, and have that pathway, and they guide through. They've chosen that program over and over. 1/3 of our students, and it might even be more than 1/3. I've learned to when I throw out numbers, I should underestimate in case I'm corrected. I'll be corrected the right way. But it's at least 1/3 of our students are undeclared. The largest degree programs we have are general studies degree programs that students eventually back into. It's those students that have excess credits to degree, attrit at a higher rate, and do all those things. And so where we have the programs that do that, we need to learn from it. So when I go and I look at business all the time, I say, what's business doing? Structured curriculum. They build team, they have moved through as cohorts, they do all those things, and they succeed. Education does that, nursing does that, dental hygiene does that, even the equine, because of the bonds that people make. Our athletes, because of the bonds they make, actually succeed. And so when we look at that 1/3 of our students that aren't in there, that's why we're doing the College Success Seminar, so that they can build the relationships with each other and pick that program. It's why we're structuring all of our curriculum to have a coherent pathway that students can see and can move across. And those are the ones we want to get up. And you'll see it even in McClenny's point of view here. He talks about that team-based learning in a couple of his last paragraphs and how we need to do it. And so, again, we know what works, right? It's how do we make sure we do that at scale across the institution? So much of what we're doing is trying to get those things, not just in certain areas, but actually do them at scale. And so we are exploring it, and we are trying to figure out, and we've even targeted which groups of students we need to work with first off and foremost, and continue to do that. Thank you. Very good conversation. I appreciate your comments, thoughts, and the dialogue.
I want to tell you that this is really thought-provoking, and it's stirred up a lot in me because I was an X-ray technician, and not in a community college, but it was all that bonding. It was a certificate at the end, the job that I would have after I was finished. And one thing that you said that I really liked, and I know that you're working on it here, is the advising model and making sure that we don't lose our students, especially it sounds like in the first 2 weeks, because when we were having our discussion, Judy, back when I was on your team, you said if they start not showing up in those first 2 weeks, we probably lost them, and then that's not good for our college. So thanks, Joe, for everything, and thanks to everyone here who does their part of the job. I really appreciate it, and I know we can be better. So we're working on it. Thank you. Next. Let's see. You're finished.
I am. Madam Chair, just one quick thing. You do have a list of things that Student Services and the academic units just brainstormed and put together as I asked them to sort of think about what we've been working on. It's not a really finely formatted document, but in terms of a snapshot of the great things that are happening here, to Trustee Mosier's comment, there's a whole bunch of it right in there, and they took the time to put it together, and it's
Wow.
certainly something that we wanted to share with you.
Thank you. Next, we have board reports, and I'm first on that list. I have had Vicky print out, Dawn asked that we have a little better, do each of you have it? The multi-rater by Marty Sizik. I wanted all of you to see it so that if you have any changes, because she says it's 100% customizable. So if you have any questions you would like to add, or if you think that we have questions there that are not pertinent, then would you please let me know in the next, let me see, today is the 15th, by the 25th. If you could let me know by the 25th of April, if you have anything you would like changed, because I would like to arrange with Marty to go ahead and have our evaluation of our president by probably the 20th or so of May, if we can get moving on this, because I think last year we had the results back in June. I don't expect you to do that this evening.
I don't think so. I think
What?
I think we had the results back in September, and then
No, I looked it up, and I had Vicki look it up, and it was June 12th or something.
we had the results back that early.
Well, because we had our evaluation and we got our results back in about October, November for the board. That was correct? Yes. Okay, thank you. So does that timeline work for people? Do you want a reminder? 25th,
Madam,
yes?
I can send out a reminder.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
it would really help me as and think about what we've gone through in the past. I'd like to come back and ask the question. This is focused on leadership,
Mhm.
okay? But it also is our opportunity to on the performance, because it's not just leadership, right?
Right.
Okay, so I'm wondering if you would share with us again. I know I looked through my mail trying to find copies of it, and I was looking for the goals that Dr. Schaefer has,
Mhm.
and I would like to have a copy of those again. So as I look through this, I can see how that would help us assess goal achievement.
Thank you very much. That's a good observation. And if Vicki, please could send that out. Can you find that? I know she can find anything. So if you would mind sending that out to the board, along with the reminder that we would like to have changed questions or added questions by April 25th, please. Does that meet your needs?
Yes, thank you.
Dawn, do you have anything you'd like to add, since you're
Not
the
at this-
one that?
Not at this point.
Oh, okay. Just let me know, because we want to
You
get
gave
on
us a
with
date, May 25th, right?
Yes, sir. Okay. Second, this is just information.
No, April 25th.
April 25th, yes. We got the summary of the comments from the LCCC employees, and it is quite a lengthy document. It's 15 pages long. I would like the board to study this very valuable information that was done by Miss Landry, Phyllis Landry, and we'll discuss how we will evaluate it probably by the next meeting, but that'll give you plenty of time to read it. Any questions? If not, we'll move on to Finance and Facilities. Kevin and Ed, please.
Madam Chair, I'm going to let
His
Well-
junior colleague take it at this
the
The
point.
one who's
senior
late.
colleague take it, but before he does, I just wanted to clarify. This will be an agenda item then, as the little note says, for the next board meeting, so we need to be prepared to discuss this survey feedback for the next board meeting.
Actually, I haven't quite decided how we're gonna do this, but I think we're gonna spend some time on this, and so,
why don't each of you think about how we can do this? I kind of know what I would like to do, but I would like to have some feedback from the rest of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senior Kevin.
All
Trustee
right.
Kilty?
We had our monthly F and F meeting, last Thursday, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Last Thursday, and it was a lengthy meeting this time. It ran on about an hour and a half, and I think we went over some pretty important points outside of looking at the various balance sheets and the income statements and the contracting and procurement reports. We had a long discussion in there about the building and who has responsibility for signing off on final design and what the building looks like and what it'll include and how it'll be constructed and so forth. And I just thought I'd talk about this for a second with the rest of the board because they haven't heard this. And as you know, we're an elected body that has a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers of this county. And we have gone out to the taxpayers and asked them to put up money for a building. And they have done so willingly, for which we are quite grateful. But we now have the responsibility to make sure that that building is what we promised, that it works well for the campus, that it's a design that fits into the campus, we think, adequately and doesn't alter the appearance of the campus in a way that we wouldn't approve of, and that the community maybe would be unhappy with and so forth. And there is now some contention over who has the ultimate authority in deciding almost everything about this building, as nearly as I can tell. What the final plans will look like and so forth. Will we be able to approve that? I don't know. This looks like it's becoming a dispute over reading of statute. Who has responsibility for what? But since we have fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers of this county, I do not see how they can cut us out of this process. And we feel that we should be sitting at the table when major decisions are made about what the building looks like, what it includes, even what the systems in the building are like, to make sure that the systems, and I'm talking about the mechanical systems and the electrical systems in that building, fit in with the rest of the campus. Because we know that buildings that are built in isolation by people who are a long way from the ground and so forth can sometimes operate very poorly with the rest of the campus infrastructure. And I think this is it's a fairly sticky point, and I just wanted the rest of the board to be aware of the fact that there is maybe some dispute, and it will come to a head quite quickly because there are reviews and approval by owner, and that's probably part of the sticking point. Who's the owner of this building? And frankly, I think we are. That's my view, and the state is supporting us. My view is we're the owners of it, and we should be approving plans and so forth. The state, some agencies in the state have a different idea here. They think the state is really the owner of it, even if they are putting less than 50% of the money in, and we are simply turning the money and the responsibility over to them, and they will build us the right building. Frankly, I think that's a recipe for not getting what's right. So, just wanted to state that.
Madam Chair, before you move off of that, Trustee Kilty, you did an excellent job. I have to commend you. You did an excellent job of reporting our discussion and our concerns. And I think the way the three of us looked at it at that meeting is that we expect our president, Dr. Joe, to be really on top of that concern and to make sure that we are continually updated on the progress toward answering that specific question. And I want to commend you for the way you did that. You did a very objective presentation.
Well, thank you. I like to think of myself as always objective.
Well, I'll tell you when you're not.
And you'll be objective about that. obviously.
I'll be subjective about that object.
Anything else?
Well, I guess not. I was going to sit back and it may take the board some time to digest what I've just talked about, but wondering, just sounding out the rest of the board and what they maybe I didn't give you enough information for you to really appreciate, I think, what is a difficult problem, and it will be resolved in one way or another, probably by the end of the year.
Well, it goes a step further. I would just add a little bit to that too. If it comes down to the point where they want the money that we have generated through the bond, which the voters here were kind enough to support us in, they want us to give them that money, and then they will expend it. They're setting on that money, which is really, I think, Laramie County's money, the voters in Laramie County, and they should have any earnings on that prior to its usage for that which they voted for. And if the state sets on that, I mean, why should they? I just, I think it is, as Kevin pointed out, and it was clarified to us at our meeting, this is a challenging question, and I'd almost I thought about this and wondered if we have some parties that maybe we need to hear from, or maybe we as a board, not just the finance committee, but maybe, the commission needs to weigh in, maybe the building commission needs to weigh in and tell us where they're at, because, as Kevin pointed out, we're in the middle of this, we've got responsibility, and yet it seems like there's two other, well, at least one entity, the State Building Commission, but also the Community College Commission and their interpretation would have a play in this too, I believe. So I think we ought to hear from those people or somehow meet with them.
I feel that Tara has something to say to us.
I do, thank you, Chairwoman Merrill. I would ask that the FNF committee speak with council about the questions that you've formulated and the concerns that you have, and we can craft a legal opinion helping to navigate these issues that you foresee before we go straight to the other opposing parties or possible opposing parties, so we have a clear understanding and make sure we're asking the right questions to those different commissions and agencies.
I guess I'm under a mistaken impression. I thought you were involved in this discussion. Not that you were at Finance and Facilities, but I thought you were aware of this issue. Is that not true?
I was not informed, no.
Okay.
You are now.
No, and Madam Chair, members of the board, certainly that will be useful and wise. Right now, where we're at with the process, we received the first draft of what was the proposed handbook. So a lot of this, I don't want to take more time, but to step back, a lot of this emanates from legislation, not this past session, but 2 sessions ago, which shifted much of the construction management responsibilities that used to reside with the Wyoming Community College Commission to A&I's Construction Management Division and Program. When they made that shift, it came over and we really didn't see rules being promulgated or any definition of exactly how that would be managed. And it was just, Carol, a month ago maybe, if even that, where we got the first draft of what their handbook was. Am I close on that?
Yeah, about 3 weeks ago.
3 weeks ago, in which they opened up for and asked for feedback. The finance officers, the administrative officers worked together to come up with some initial questions that they wanted to pose. We've now just received some responses to those questions, but we're not even quite sure if this is the formal rulemaking process. So the presidents will be speaking with Jim Rose next Wednesday on this, I believe, and trying to figure out what stage are we at in this process and where do we get and where do we go from here, and that's really when we'll have to start looking at, because I wouldn't want to waste your time at this point when I'm not quite sure what it is, what questions I'm asking you to research for us.
Sure.
But there are some fundamental ones that we will need to see resolved, or at least some position more clearly articulated from construction management, such as what do we do when projects have local funding and state funding, and how do we work at that. My hope is that we can develop and design an approach that really is collaborative, not with one side making all the calls, because our legislators were generous in putting $18 million into these buildings as well, and so certainly they should have some say in this process, and their agency should be involved. My hope is that we strike that balance in collaboration where there's opportunity for joint decision making, where we can really work together. We just don't know exactly what side of the coin we're landing on right now, and that's one of the things that we're trying to grapple with. So we're hoping to get a little better clarity, and then we'll know specifically here are the questions we need to have resolved, and would love to have a legal opinion on, such as what are the board's fiduciary responsibilities for locally levied funds? And can we really just cede those over, even with the memorandum of agreement, to a state agency to direct without having some responsibility in the decision? We don't know if that's where they're gonna land for sure yet, because it's still the process. When we get a better idea of that's what they're gonna propose to the building commission, then we'll certainly have to dig in and get some opinions.
Okay. Trustee Kelsey?
Yeah, and I didn't want to give the impression that I was coming down hard on one side here or the other.
No.
And I understand that a couple of buildings on community college campuses have been built under this environment and have actually turned out well. But I have the uneasy feeling that there's a great deal of just sort of ad hocness to this process. No process is set in stone, and then that provides us with really no guarantee that this will work well in the future, especially as personnel change. As we know, personnel, if there's no process in place and we're just doing things ad hoc, personnel then become almost everything.
Yep.
And that's the worrisome thing here for me.
Okay, I'm
Oh.
glad you brought this up.
I sort of lost track of where we
You need a
were.
motion
Okay,
to
could I-
approve, yeah.
With that, I'd
But
like
could I
to,
just finish that up so that Tara and Dr. Schaefer will collaborate and we will have some kind of information when things start to happen?
Yeah, certainly, and Madam Chair, to
Thank
Trustee
you.
Erickson's comment, I'm happy to make it a standing item on my president's report each
Great.
meeting until we come to some resolution, but certainly the Facilities and Finance Committee will be apprised as
Yeah.
we travel down this journey, and at some point, we may need to actually step in front of the State Building Commission, or I actually think having construction management or A&I and come in and share their perspective with us at a board meeting, they're here in town, that's not a bad approach, so, yeah.
all right.
Okay, thank you.
With that, I'd just like to move that we accept the finance and facility report, including the consent agenda items.
Thank you very much.
Second? No.
We don't need to have it.
Discussion?
You want more
Second.
discussion?
Well, there was
Discussion.
an item I wanted
Okay.
to, at least I felt like we needed to add. We talked
Okay.
about the renovation of the physical education and learning commons. And I just wanted to clarify for those who will come across information on that, that we're following the master plan.
Okay.
We did look at that and make sure that we are consistent with the master plan that the board approves, so that we're not off doing things that were not a part of that master plan. And that, if I understand correctly, and Dr. Schaefer maybe could help me with that, but we're looking at studies on these. We're not at the point where any decisions are made yet, correct?
Yeah, correct, Madam Chair. Trustee Mosier, that is correct. We're going through initial design phases to get an understanding of the scope and really the feasibility of these projects. And then we can have the decision and the discussion about, well, what do we do next? And do we proceed? Do we wait? Do we reform? Or do we do those types of things? So it really is a level one planning analysis at this point. The other thing, just quick, at your next board meeting, I have scheduled on at the dinner time an update on our facilities, and I think it'll be good for me to bring the master plan, because just in our conversation at the committee meeting, going through and seeing what we've done and how we're sequencing with the master plan was even helpful for me, so we'll bring that, have that as a conversation, but I'll ask Carol and Tim McNamara to give us an update on all of these projects again.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry.
I just, let me finish with this part here, if you would, Madam Chair.
Perfect.
I just wanted to emphasize that the decisions are not made. These are studies. We're in the process of working on these. So that I don't want people assuming that we've already decided or made some choice about this is what we're doing in the PE, this is what we're doing, and those are set. That's not the case.
Okay.
Those are in the process of being studied.
Madam Chair, that's where I wish to clarify that a little bit. As I understand, I'm on the steering committee for the physical education expansion, and I went to the open house today and unfortunately, I think everyone was invited from the board, but the invitation went on the in-house distribution.
Oh,
And
I didn't hear that.
this is an observation for everybody. If you want to contact us, don't do it through the in-house distribution, because
That's
we
right.
don't look at that. We got our own email. I do on on a regular basis, because I find out lots of things of what's going on, and who sends out this and who sends out that, and what's available here and what's available there, and who lost their keys or whatever it may be. But the thing is that with the physical education building, they just completed level 1 planning, and now level 2 planning is in the process going forward, and the monies have been approved to go forward with that study by us previously. So that's where we are. So it is in the study phase, but it's at that second level now.
Madam Chair, Trustee Erickson, for clarification, we're moving through the planning process. When we get done with planning, there will be decision points for the campus and for you, and some of those decision points are actually coming up quickly. Not that it commits us to building the projects, to spending funds on the projects, but we simply have to get them in the pipeline to go through the Community College Commission, State Building Commission, through the legislature next year, ultimately to even get approval to move forward with it. And so what we're trying to do with these initial studies is to get to that concept and a rough idea of what the cost will be, and then get something in the pipeline so that if we decide to move forward with those, we're able to do that within the next year and a half. If we miss these deadlines, we wait a full year before we can even start the process. So you're looking at 2 years before you can even move forward with it. So, some of it is study as you go, but we have to adhere with the state's process to make sure that we're in the pipeline should things pan out and we want to move forward with these projects like we hope we will.
Okay,
Yeah.
great,
Good clarification.
thank you. Anything else? Okay, I think we consented to this.
Question. Oh, we don't need to vote on, no,
No.
no, I thought we, I'm sorry.
Ed, you're always sneaking in
I
on
have
me.
no question.
Very good. Okay, next we have the very important 2015 budget. I want to say before we kind of finish up here that this Finance and Facility Committee is one of the most exciting that we have, and if any of you can attend, that would be great. We do notice it so that the full board can attend.
If that's excitement, I would hate to see ennui around here.
Stop it.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, members of the board, as the peanut gallery over here chuckles, I guess beauty's in the eye of the beholder, as is excitement. I don't know. So, Madam Chair, members of the Board of Trustees, it's my pleasure to present you the first draft, the first reading of the FY15, the fiscal year 2014-15 operating budget. This is the first of many conversations that we will have and that you'll see for the budget. And as we jump in and get started here, it's easy for me to sit up here and give this presentation and really represent this budget, but it's incredibly difficult, nor should I take the credit for anything that's been put together here. We have had exceptional engagement by the campus. Our budget director, Jane Myrick, and our Vice President Hoagland, and so many others have really worked hard at not just putting together a good budget, but refining a process that literally in the 3 budgets I've been through is night and day. And so I can't commend them enough and commend the campus enough and the groups that are involved with putting this budget together. It really came together quite well this year, and I just am very pleased with their work and their efforts. And I know Jane spent many long hours and days at the computer, but working with the Budget Process Advisory Committee, the Budget Resource Allocation Committee, and improving forms and reporting and sharing, it's really been an exceptional process. And so I'm pleased to be able to present that. I want to start really sort of covering the things that I discussed in my budget memo to you, but I wanted to start first off with the big picture. Some of you have seen graphs like this, especially those of you that were involved in the legislative process. But what this graph essentially shows you, and it's not in your book, it essentially demonstrates sort of the funding over the past 3 biennia, or the past 2 biennia, and then going into the current one for community colleges. The blue money represents the state block grant, if you will, that goes to the commission that they then allocate for aid to the community colleges. And the red block represents the funding for enrollment growth. So the enrollment growth funds are one-time only funds that have been funded for the biennium based on the overall enrollment in the community colleges since 2004, 2005. That's the base year with it. They do not represent all the enrollment growth that we should have been funded based off of the model and the current formula, just what the legislature ultimately approved. And so there's a couple things that I want to point out. For the 11-12 biennium, 180 million in that block grant for state aid, 11.7 in enrollment growth. As we went into the 13-14 biennium, we saw the start of the biennium up slightly in the block, down with enrollment growth. But even though we had, I think, a very, very good legislative session, and you'll hear that a lot about community colleges did fairly well, there's a couple of things that still we need to keep our eye on. The first is that we had essentially the biennialization of those 6% cuts in coming into this fiscal year. When you look at how that carries over, you'll notice right away that we have about a $5.7 million reduction in that state block grant. That's the standard budget. That's the ongoing funds. We're actually starting this biennium with a $5.7 million decrease in overall funding. We were very fortunate that the legislature came in and said, but we're going to award you 14.3 in enrollment growth funds. I'll talk about, sort of the strings with that funding. Again, it's one time only, but you'll see if you even go back, to biennia, it's still below the threshold of where we were at in that 11-12 biennia with it, and we've seen the reduction in our ongoing stabilized funds. So there is still a stability issue that we need to be working with our legislative delegation, the Association of Community College Trustees here, because this is the volatility we've seen from biennia to biennia, and with especially the large chunks of one-time only funds. We need to keep a track on that, because each year we go into budgeting, it makes it more and more complex in trying to figure out what do we have for sure and what do we have just for the next year or two. So from the state context, I just touched on that. The reduction in the standard budget that goes into this year is about, I think it's between 5.6 and 5.7. So conservative people round down. Even if it's not over 5, I round up. The one-time funding, the $14.3 million for enrollment growth. We started with about $9 million from the Joint Appropriations Committee recommendation. The legislature on the floors increased that to 14.3. That's what we were asking. We were hoping it would be folded into the base. Instead, it's one-time only enrollment growth, and for the first time, that entire amount is going to be allocated based off of performance, and performance being the percent of successful course completions at each of the community colleges. We naturally have the largest. We have 21.5% of all of those successful course completions, and it's because we're enrolled the largest. It doesn't mean we're the most effective at getting successful course completions. We're the largest. There's some nuances that you heard Trustee Erickson talk about from our commission meeting last time. Those course completions, we treat a 1-credit A as the same as we do with a 4-credit class that leads to an A. So there's some issues with the model, but for the most part, that's what we'll have for the biennium. We also had successful appropriation for a 2% salary increase. One thing I want to point out, it's 2%, but the legislature only funds the state's share, and that's about 61% of what it gets. So even though it's a 2% pay raise, of the 2%, and you'll see this in a little bit, they appropriate 61% roughly of that. And then also a retirement increase of 0.875%. That some of that will be picked up by the state, some of that's going to be have to be picked up by the employee as well. A few other things, again, you're aware of this, 5% tuition increase starting in the fall of 2014. This was enacted by the Community College Commission. Jane has estimated revenue of about $300,000 for next year. And as I stated back when we talked about tuition increases, my interest and my intent and what you'll see in this budget is to put a big chunk of that towards need-based financial aid. Every 4 years, the state, the Community College Commission recalibrates their allocation model. And so it's the model they use to determine what amount of funds go to each of the community colleges. They do that recalibration, and each time they do it, they see some shift between the percent of an institution's funding that's in fixed costs and a percent that's in variable costs. They recalibrated it, and when they did that this time, it actually favored LCCC. So because of that recalibration, we'll see about $863,000 of an increased funding coming to LCCC as a result of that recalibration. One aspect of the variable funds, though, is that we're seeing even here an escalation of the amount of the funding that's going to be allocated based on performance. And so the last biennium was 10% that was based on course completion rates. Moving into FY15, 15% of the variable funds will be allocated based on a mix of completion rates and overall course completions. And then as we move into the future, it'll go to 20% in 16, and we believe 25% in 17. So the overall amount of our funding this year that's based on performance is significant. And the trending is that it's going to continue to grow. And the last thing, we estimate that the local appropriation will be up slightly and should generate about $246,000 of new funds as well. So institutionally, when we look inside, what we're looking at essentially is $1.5 million of this enrollment growth funding. We'll get $1.5 million in this year, 1.5 in the next year. That's going to be treated entirely as one-time only funding. So we're looking at how we fund one-time only things, whether that's adjunct lines, equipment purchases, other one-time only expenses. We are not going to spend that money on base commitments in the event that we don't see it in the next biennium. But we do have about $1.8 million that we can use towards ongoing needs from the local appropriation, internal reallocation, and the recalibration of the funding model. We do have some funds that we can work with. How we're going to work with those, as I stated earlier, is really being driven by our strategic plan goals and some other institutional priorities. So those are our goals and our strategies focused on increasing the high-value credentials that our students earn, strengthening relationships and connections with our community education providers, the workforce, the university, building organizational capacity, systems, the way we approach things, thinking about how we strengthen the organization as a whole, and then transforming our physical environment. The other institutional priorities, I think this year, you'll hear in a second, we hopefully have met your expectation to really free up our 1 mil funds. The 1 mil is a fund that you have to approve. You have the permissive authority to levy 1 mil. Every 2 years, you have to vote and agree to do that. You'll be considering that this June. But we've really tried to, because again of the need for liquidity there for a variety of things, we've tried to take base commitments off of there. And then the last one is investing in people. A couple other things, increasing financial assistance. You'll see we're increasing scholarships by about $202,000. The majority of, or that and almost the entire amount, is going into need-based aid. And we're doing two things there. One is growing a pilot program that we started this year, the Soaring Eagle program, that really grew out of a committee that you, Madam Chair, were involved with, as well as other folks, and really driven by our Director of Financial Aid, and growing that really targets first-generation students that have unmet need, and unmet need being they don't have tuition fees and books covered to go here. And so we made a great stab at that this year, and I think we made some headway. We can do more. The other piece of that is really going to be targeting non-traditional students. Our adult population, once they leave, if they don't complete, that we can get Pell hopefully if they apply, but there really is no need-based aid for that demographic here in the state, and so we want to engage that demographic and get them to a credential, and so you'll see some money going there. And then just the overall budget allocation, I want to point out, we're really trying to, again, invest in the areas that touch students the most. Our target has been and will continue to be that 70% of the operating expenditures will be in the areas of student services, student affairs, instruction, and academic support. Scholarships is denoted here separately, but that functionally falls under the student services budget. In this proposed budget, we're at 68.6%. Our target is 70%, so we're not there yet, but we're trying to move in that direction. Enrollment growth, you've seen this graph. You'll notice the ebbs and flows of our budget, or of our enrollment. You see that exceptional growth over the past 10 years, and then the tapering off of our enrollment that we're experiencing essentially statewide, in many ways nationally. So we do anticipate that we'll continue to see some of that downwarding trend. We hope that it levels and eventually starts correcting itself based on the work that we're doing and some of the demographic shifts. You have a few of these slides in there. I'm going to go through them really quick, and then we'll pause to answer any questions. But we try to look at is sort of some comparisons between LCCC and the Wyoming community colleges in general. This one looks at just revenue per FTE, and you'll notice that we tend to have just slightly less revenue per student FTE. The major dip in the middle is where we had enrollment increases without a whole lot of increase in funding. So you'll see the revenue per FTE decrease. And then as you see, because of some of the increased funding and the decrease in enrollment, you'll see that that's revenue per FTE goes up. Sources of revenue, where we only outpace the average community colleges across state is in our tuition and fees. Some of that's a function of our enrollment size. But you'll see that on average we receive less state appropriations, fewer local appropriations, and fewer other sources of funding. Comparative expenditures, this is similar to the revenue per FTE, but it essentially illustrates what we spend per student here at the college and compared. And then this one I want to pause and draw your attention to. This is expenditures per FTE. So this is one of those the metrics that we look at when we say, okay, where are we spending our money? So per student, as a way to compare us between the other community colleges in the state, where are we putting our money? And I want to just point out that we outpace the community college average in terms of spending on instruction. We're slightly lower in public service. We outpace them in academic support. Student services were slightly lower, trying to grow their institutional support. We are lower than the community college average. Plant operations just very slightly lower, and scholarships slightly lower. Now these are actuals from FY13. So we expect when we get actuals from 14, and certainly where we're going into 15, we'll start to see some trending up in student services, trending up in scholarships, and I don't know if we're making all that much headway in institutional support, but still, again, trying to make sure that we're investing our funds to those areas that we think hit students the greatest. I'm going to share some metrics we see that now look at our total operating budget, and when I talk about operating budget versus the general fund, I'm talking general fund, the unrestricted fund, as well as the 1 mil. These are the total operating dollars that we can use in a fiscal year. And this graph is on your page 10, and it is busy. We're going to figure out a better way to demonstrate this. But what this does is it allows us to look at both year-to-year trends and sort of a 5-year analysis of what's the trending in our investment, of our expenditures. Where are we putting money? And these are the places where we're trying to increase overall investment in instruction. It's the largest chunk of our expenditures and where we put our revenue, so it takes more to start to make changes. But you can take a look at that 5-year trending, up 21%, almost 22%, and even the year-to-year increase of 1.8% or so. Public service is flat for the year essentially, and it's down about 6% over 5 years. Academic support is up this year 3.4%, only up almost 6% for the 5 years. Student services is up 13.71%. It's interesting when you look the year-to-year, the boost that we have here. A lot of that increase is coming just as we move into this year, and it's a reflection of our investment last time and the continuation of advising investment and things like that. Institutional support is down. 5-year picture, we are up, and I would say we're up fairly significantly, but we're really trying to evaluate the investments in the institutional support areas and make sure that we are where we need to be. Operations and maintenance is down, but significantly up over 5 years. And then the scholarships are actually down over the 5 years significantly, but we're trying to rectify that and really put targeted scholarship dollars now that we have a strategic approach to how we're going to use those. This series of graphs just represents sort of the comparison from last year's budget to what we're proposing for this year. You'll see some of the slight increases. Remember, our target for instruction is 50%. We're at about 43%. We've got room to grow there yet. I think some of that will be rectified as we start to see enrollment increases again in what we're doing, but we've got room to go there. But really collectively, when we look at those core areas of where we're investing that impact students, we're moving in the right direction, and we're going to continue to push that way, so we're allocating our funds into those core areas that touch our students. And then these last two graphs, I just want to share with you, I think are great visual representations of how we're actually mapping proposed expenditures to the strategic plan goals and our KPIs. And it's not a perfect science yet, but boy, I tell you what, Jane and Carol did a good job of trying to grapple this. As we developed our trend data, and as we looked at the one-time only requests and some of the other requests, we actually asked cost center managers and directors and deans and the people that are reviewing this to tie their requests to strategic plan goals and strategies, and then you'll see in this next one to key performance indicators. And then we also tie and ask for in the request for one-time only funds, for new position requests, all those things to tie those to the strategic plan and actually demonstrate that you're meeting the strategic plan. This essentially is a visual representation of the total expenditures within our operating budget that are aligned with our strategic plan. And you'll see the largest chunk is going towards that goal one of increasing high-value credentials. And then comparatively from there, the amount of money that we're proposing spending in each of those areas. This one is a little bit busier. It actually looks at the investment by our key performance indicator and the measures groups, and essentially asking people to say, if we're trying to move the needle on these measures and these indicators, where are you saying this money is going to go towards? And so you'll see some emphasis on this academic preparation, not surprising. We're working on developmental education, mathematics redesign. It's where our largest enrollments tend to be right now, and we're really trying to invest in and improve in those areas. And for the next iteration of your book, I think we'll have these in there. So go to page 14 now, and I just want to walk you through sort of an analysis of the estimated funds available. If I get out of my wheelhouse, I'm going to ask Jane or Carol to correct me as we go through here. But this just sort of details out what I illustrated in those first slides. For new funds, state aid from the formula recalibration, we expect about $863,000. The enrollment growth funding, about $1.5 million. The salary appropriation, so this is the 61.59% of 2% is $331,000. The retirement appropriation, about $107,000. You'll see some significant reductions we're planning for in high-tech fees and athletics because of where we see enrollment going. Local appropriation, the $246,000, and then the tuition increase. And so that's how we get to that roughly the $3.3 million of funds that we have available. In terms of distributing those funds, what we're looking at, again, educational advancements. Surprisingly, this number has been fairly accurate year after year, and these are for advancements for people that achieve educational milestones. Market adjustments, we continue to anticipate we'll have to work with different positions, especially as we're doing positions analyses and make market adjustments. One piece that I wanted to put in here, I think I mentioned this to you, it was analysis of a market study on how we're compensating our custodial services staff, and the finding that we were significantly below market. We used vacancy savings for this year to enact that right now, but going into next year we have to sustain that in the budget. For only $56,000, what we're doing for the custodial staff is going to go a long way in terms of retention and recruitment and stabilizing that workforce. The employer retirement contribution, I'm not even going to try to explain the percentages, but it's 100% of the 0.875% that the employer has to cover. It's about $174,000. The 2% salary increase, and this is where we take the 61% from the state, and we have to add in our local funds. It's actually $434,000. We have about $282,000 set aside for new positions. That we'll ultimately determine based off of the HR prioritization plan and the conversations we've been having. And then we have some carryover of reclassifications, replacements, things like that from last year for about $1.1 million, predominantly targeted at staffing and employees. In terms of on 15 there, in terms of investments in operating budgets and key things here, you'll see academic affairs operating budget increasing there. A lot of that is really focused on curriculum redesign and reform, programmatic marketing and awareness to get out there, and so I think that's the vast majority of that increase. Under student services, their operating budget's actually down, but the increase that they have there is because of the increase in the scholarships, the $202,000. In my area, you'll see the big chunk, this 523,000. This is moving really the final amounts of base or ongoing commitments on the 1 mil into the general fund. The last piece there, outside of the Eastern Laramie County, the Pine Bluffs Outreach Center, the last bastion, if you will, of ongoing base commitments was the IT services operating funds, and we've now moved those off. And so it's a big jump underneath underneath Chad's area in institutional effectiveness, but it gets that by getting that off of 1 mil. And then an increase of 134,000 in operating budget that includes increased recruitment costs. It includes some 360 review mechanisms, similar to what you're doing for me, we'll be doing for the cabinet, and having that in the HR budget. And then administration and finance, almost the entirety of their increase is increases in insurance and utility rates. And I think that's almost the totality of that increase. Strategic and one-time only initiatives, $750,000. These will be going towards the one-time only requests that we've received. I think we received about 900,000. So the fact that we can fund 750,000 of those is really going to be significant going into this year. And then a small operating reserve, again with one-time only funds. And these are the reserves that if enrollment shifts downward, if something comes up, we have some money within the current operating budget to be able to allocate. So that's our total allocation. I'll conclude my remarks here by talking about the 1 mil piece, just because it connects as part of our operating budget. Again, the 1 mil is the permissive levy that you can approve every 2 years. You've directed us, since I've been here, to essentially create liquidity within that 1 mil so we can invest in facilities planning, in other types of strategic initiatives, and have some flexible funding to do things. And so we've done that. Again, the only base or ongoing expenditures under the 1 mil going into this year is the money for the Eastern Laramie County Outreach Center at Pine Bluffs. Other than that, we've had to put $500,000 in there for some facilities renovation and maintenance projects. With the shift of the construction management from the commission over to construction management division, they are taking a more conservative approach to what they're going to allow major maintenance funds to be used on. We will not, to our best of our knowledge, we will not be able to use them on parking lots, sidewalks, and other things that we traditionally have. So we've had to actually budget for those things somewhere, and so that's where you'll see the 500,000. We're going to continue the Successful Innovation Funds program and have another 200,000 in there. You'll see the operating funds for Pine Bluffs, 275,000 for facilities planning, 75,000 for employee professional development, and then we've put a small equipment reserve fund in there as well. So if something breaks on campus or we need to replace something before we have to dip into other reserves, we have a current fund or an operating budget that we can actually dip into. So I'll let Carol come up and actually finish the funds, and then I'll stand for questions with her.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair and trustees. I'll go through the remaining funds that we operate with. And the first one is the auxiliary fund, and as you know, that is the fund where we record the on-campus services to students, faculty, and staff for a fee. And in this budget, you'll notice that there is a slight decrease, and mostly that's has to do with the facility rental area. And we had money in last year to build the outdoor stalls, and that's done, so that budget has decreased. The 5 mil fund, we're hoping that it's going to be used up with the planning dollars, but we left it in this presentation in case it wasn't. But right now, it is dedicated to planning. We'll continue to use it for planning, and this is what we'll be paying for our level 1s, level 2s, level 3, wherever we're at in that planning process for the buildings. The restricted fund is where we record our federal grants, so they have external restrictions on them. There can be some state grants in there as well. Anything that really has an external restriction is where we record that here. And you'll see that there is a pretty good increase in restricted fund this year, and that's due basically to an increase in direct loan money from the feds, and then also we received a federal Act Now career training grant of about $1 million. And then we always include an amount for other grants that we might get within the year. The endowment fund is where we record our money that comes in, donations, and the challenge match funding that we get from the state. Now, you know that we did use up our other challenge match, but we did get another 1.25 million in this next year to again match, and so we've got that recorded in there, and then of course the investment income that we would earn on that. The plant fund is where we record our long-term assets, our construction projects, our renewal and replacement. We make our debt service payments out of there, and then that's also where we record our it says long-lived assets, but it's actually our inventory of our buildings and our equipment and that kind of activity. In the plant fund, you'll notice a very large increase, and the largeness is our general obligation bond money that we will be getting, the 25 million, the state appropriations for the new buildings, and major maintenance you've seen in there before, and then the contingency reserve is also in there, which you've seen. But so the two large amounts are the building money. And then we'll also have the ongoing projects that are happening out of the major maintenance funding that we have, and we'll be detailing those when we get to the carryover budget. And I did want to make note that this presentation does not include any carryover funds. So you'll see some big changes, but most of those changes have to do with the fact that last year's carryover and these current figures do not. Once we get a little further down the process, we'll be adding those carryover funds in. Then, in summary, when I first put this out here, we noticed we had a 73% increase, and that was a little shocking, so we broke it down a little bit. If we did not have the bond money and the state appropriation for new buildings, the total budget increase would be about 8.78%, about 5.9 million. With that in there, it's an actually 73% increase to our budget, or about $49 million. And so, all in all, we believe that the budget itself, we've addressed the capital construction needs. We think it ensures a stable future. It progresses us, as you saw earlier, towards the achievement of our strategic plan. We believe it provides well for student needs, and once again, I'd like to reiterate that it was developed through a collaborative and collective effort, and I do want to thank Jane for her leadership in making that happen. We believe that we've had lots more input and thoughtful input, and it just gets better every year. So with that, I think I'm done, unless you have a question for Dr. Schaefer.
We know where the hard ones are going.
Oh, Trustee Kilty has a question.
You know, even you, Dr. Schaefer, have told us that a budget that looks like this has a lot of latitude in it that you can use to push around in various ways. And so Ed and I particularly have always liked to look at the detail, and that document's usually in the library. So is that document online or in the library at this point?
Is it in the library? It's online.
It's online?
Mm-hmm.
And could you tell me approximately where?
Be with the College Council, probably the quickest way, or is there another?
Maybe you could just email it
Yeah.
to
Yeah, Madam Chair,
Trustee
Trustee Kilty, you
Or to
probably
all of
find
us.
it in the College Council agenda materials, but Jane's saying it's actually out on the Eagle's Eye as well, underneath the budget
Oh,
folders,
okay.
but we'll get you the specific folder
That would be
where
great.
they exist.
Is that okay with you?
That's fine, but that's not the end of my question.
Go ahead.
You know, if you go onto page 6, and you see the downturns in FTEs and head count here, the FTEs in particular, I realize that downturn really began, you know, we sort of hit a peak a couple of years ago, but can you attribute any of that downturn to the policy of restricting classes to 12 participants in a class? Do you think that 12 participants is the right level? If we were to drop it to 10, would we see any change here?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Kilty, I don't know that I could say it is or isn't a result, or if that some of that is a part of it. In that first year with the lateness in which we worked through the enrollment management approaches and canceling some of those classes, did we lose some enrollments? Yeah, we probably did. I think the majority of that, just by matching what's happening across the state, is really a product of two things. One is the decreasing unemployment rate and what's happening in the market right now, and two is actually a dip in our high school graduate populations. And we are at a 10-year trough, essentially, in the number of high school graduates in Wyoming. We will see that correcting here in about a year, and then over the next 10 years, it's about a 30% increase in the number of high school students. So it's possible, but if we were the true outlier, I think there was something more about what we're doing internally. It's not surprising we're seeing a shift, actually, where we're losing ground in FTE more than we are in headcount. Again, we're seeing more students now moving to the part-time status, which, tells me that they're working more. I don't know. Is some of it there? Yeah, probably, but I don't think that's the majority of the reason the enrollment's shifting.
A related question to that is that, of course, part of the reason for, putting a cap at 12 participants in courses to make them run is to increase your efficiency. And if you look at it, expenditures per I think it's per FTE, that's actually still rising a little bit. Any comments on what's causing that rise? Because it was falling for a number of years, expenditures per FTE, and now is kind of bottomed out about 2 years ago or so and is rising some.
I would posit that most of that change is a fluctuation of enrollment, and then as we see here with the slight increase in funding, that would be my guess. So we had incredible enrollment, growth all the way up, in fact, through almost 2011. As enrollment decreases and funding stays relatively stable, the actual expenditures per student FTE are going to increase as they go up. Because of the enrollment decrease, though, and the funding here from 12 to 13, and this is where it'll be interesting looking into 14 and 15, I actually think we'll see this tapering off, and part of that will be as a result of the enrollment management approaches we're taking, and we already have seen that in this current year's budget. Our projected budget for adjunct faculty is significantly higher than what's coming in for actual expenditures, and so we're spending less because we're managing those courses and much in the adjunct faculty area because we are fractioning the enrollments.
Thank you. The next question, I think is pretty trivial, and I probably answered it myself, but on page 24, you talk about an early childhood center, and in past years, we've always talked about this as the CDC. Is the change in name, Early Childhood Center, it's still essentially the CDC, or does that include anything else now?
No, it's the same.
Okay.
We're just trying to emphasize its instructional component.
Yeah. The details of the proposed one-time expenses on page 43, we see the proposed expenditures here, but what we don't see is any particular reason for any of these at this point, and I'm trying to think if this is sort of different than we've seen in the past. These one-time expenditures were sort of separate from the budget and not in the budget, if I remember right, but oftentimes, we get at least some rationale for these expenditures. So I look at this and I see an awful lot of these expenditures are related, of course, to the health sciences. The anatomy and physiology large models, these are all new ones. They're not being used to replace any, right? So they're an expansion of our capability. And I know in the past we've had kind of a shortage of those models. You can see students sitting around in places waiting for their chance to get at the models and so forth. But we've got a flat panel digital x-ray detector here. A couple of years ago, I think we spent quite a lot of money on a new digital x-ray system here. And so I'm wondering, is this related to that? Does this enhance the capability of some other system that we had on campus? What's the rationale for that? The standalone book scanner, what's the rationale for that? The card readers and software to track attendance at events. What's the rationale for that? Now, the institutional effectiveness, core upgrade and replacement lease. No explanation of that. So I'm not asking you for that right at this moment, but I'm wondering if the board is gonna get to see the rationale for these expenditures.
No, and, Madam Chair, Trustee Kilty, certainly, and in fact, we'd be happy to provide that with you. Just be careful what you ask for. The process in which we've employed, and maybe Jane can talk to it briefly, in regards to the requests, the tools that we use for seeking specific information balanced against key criterion within a rubric, the heavy emphasis on our strategic plan, the methodology that the Budget Resource Allocation Committee used to carve out certain funds for infrastructural needs, as well as then a larger portion for things that go to more of the direct student impacts. The system is actually almost, it's almost so complex that I can't even understand it. But what probably would be best is that our next time we read this, we bring either Dr. Bender or Chad Marley or somebody, and they can walk you through that process and share the details and the rationale behind it. Is it in their book? Do you know? No.
And it hasn't been attached.
Yeah, and it hasn't, because this is, it's that fine line between an overall budget request versus identified management decisions on expenditures. We know that you have an interest in those things, and certainly you want to validate that process, but I'm happy to bring them back and have them talk about the process. But I would argue, well, I can't answer the specifics of these, since the committee really did this with, and Jane. The process that we're employing now to determine the allocation of those funds is extremely more rigorous and objective than it was 3 years ago, than it was last year, and I think you'd honestly be impressed by the work that went into that.
Last year, one of the things that we saw at one point, and it wasn't included in this budget, but we did see at one point, was a matrix that provided new positions and rationale for those. And we will also see that at some point.
Madam Chair, Trustee Kilty, if you'd certainly like to look at those tools, we'd be happy to come and talk about both of them and illustrate the way we've done that. I think last year what you saw was during the report from the Budget Resource Allocation Committee, when Chad and Cindy came and actually presented that process, and I'm happy to do that again.
I don't think that's exactly the report I was thinking of. Well, all I saw was paper, and it might have been through an F&F meeting. We might have looked at it there, and that's why I remember it. Okay.
I don't doubt that they had handouts. I don't remember otherwise.
I'm finished, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
I would just follow on. I've got a number of other questions, but I'd like to focus on this one, since we're looking at the one-time purchases.
Please tell us the page again.
43.
Thank you.
These, for example, the anatomy, that's $75,000. Will those still be coming to us as notification through the bid process? Because those would have to be bid, right?
Madam Chair, Trustee Mosier, yes. Your historical practice, though, has been that the approval of those items within the budget denote your approval to basically go out and bid those and expend those funds. So in your budgets, you've historically approved one-time only expenditures that are above the $30,000, as well as maintenance projects that are above the $30,000. And so your approval of the budget have been those approvals. As we do things over the course of the year that aren't within the budget, those certainly come back.
Okay. A number of these items are replacement, but I'm wondering, relative to other items we need, at least current, in the near-term future, and I'm surprised we're not seeing some of these, and it was asked about at a previous time, in terms of some kind of replacement schedule, whether we're talking computer labs, mobile computer labs, replacement equipment within the auto body, auto diesel, welding, which is a program that I assume we'll hear more about before too long. But I'm just wondering how we could build this into the budget process so that we know, for example, some of those items are going to be put in 2015-16, 16-17, some kind of replacement schedule that we can count on that as being a part of this, and those folks in those areas would know that they're looking ahead and out there preparing and looking at what their needs are relative to replacing computers. Plus, I'm a little concerned, I haven't heard anything for a number of years, and maybe that's all happened within the budget and we don't see it, but I'm wondering about servers and things of that nature, because at some point, we've got to be looking at expanding, I
Sure.
would think.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Mosier, we do incorporate many of those cyclings within the one-time only request. We've got some work to do with some of the large pieces, like we're working through some upgrade needs with the vehicle lifts in the automotive shop right now. But for the most part, that cycling is intended to be done through here. We do some of the computer stuff through the high-tech fees and what we do there. They keep a schedule for that implementation. That expenditure that Dr. Kilty pointed out about those core services, that's the servers, the switches, the closets that are doing that. And we've been cycling through each budget year when we propose the budget along the cycle that Chad keeps up within IT to make sure that we're upgrading those services, especially the critical core ones, as well as computers and labs as we're able to do that. I would say the one area that we probably have the greatest room for improvement is really planning long-term for those programs that don't have set aside reserve funds like dental hygiene because of the fee, but have large expenditures with that. And so like the lifts in the automotive one, they could cost significantly to replace. Planning for that and getting us on that cycle, we're doing some things, I think, going into this year with our Carl D. Perkins funds to do at least for our CTE areas and equipment analysis and upgrade. So we've got some areas we need to improve that process, but from an IT perspective and a healthcare perspective, we incorporate those within this process, as well as using high-tech fees, as well as using the programmatic designated reserves.
It's good to hear that the plan is in place and that we're doing that, because we've come a long way from the low-cost replacement of typewriters.
Yeah.
But in addition, on page 3, one of the things, when we look at the dollars that are going to be received for budget, I think in discussion, we know that roughly $331,650 is state in terms of that 2%, and the college's local match of that has to be around $102,000, something like that. That's that total $433,990. And I'm just wondering, you spoke earlier this evening about the importance in what you're doing for some training with adjunct. And I know from my experience years ago, and I don't think we've seen a significant shift in this, having quality adjunct, which is a key to those programs. For example, we use an awful lot of adjunct in many of the health programs. I shouldn't say an awful lot. We use a number of folks, and in many other programs, that's also the case. And I'm concerned that we haven't, to my knowledge, so I may be wrong, correct me, we haven't done anything for them in a bit. And I would really think that relative to our goals and instruction, we're going to be asking these people to take some training because we want to upgrade what they can do. And we might, I don't know whether the plan is to pay for some of that training time or not, or whether that's a part of the process, but I know these adjunct have given an awful lot. And they sure as the devil do this out of love because we're not paying them nearly enough. So a short answer here that I'm trying to get at is I think we ought to look at some way to increase remuneration or benefits to them in this budget. And I think, I don't know if we've got the slack to do that, and I'm late on the poll in saying that, but I really think that we ought to give some consideration to show the adjunct some fashion that we really do value them.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, Trustee Mosier, great minds think alike. It's not my mind, it's Dr. Fierro's and others. Just this past semester, we made a significant adjustment to adjunct, moving all of our adjunct compensation up to $700 a credit. Tell me if I get off base here. We have a very small minority of adjunct who are actually making slightly more than that. but we had plenty of them that were far below that, and we recognized that we needed to increase that. So we did that increase, froze those folks that were above the 700 who were compensated quite well, but moved the adjuncts up to $700 per credit. That is reflected in this in the operating budgets within the instructional areas. There is an increase for the compensation of adjunct.
Okay. The only thing I might take a little bit of concern with is well compensated. I don't even think if they're making over that 700 that we would talk about them being well compensated unless there's something else there that I'm not aware of.
I'd say well compensated by comparative analysis of the state and the region.
So I would just throw in and argue that we ought to do better,
Oh,
and maybe we are.
I don't disagree. I think all of these things are goals for ours that we'll phase in as we move into the future and try to increase that.
Madam Chair, I have some more questions, but I would like to allow fellow trustees some questions if they have them, and then I'll come back.
I haven't seen anyone else.
Hello.
Oh, pardon me, trustee Erickson.
I do not have a question, but earlier today, I had the opportunity to talk with Jane Murray about possible questions that I might have. And,
Jane Myrick?
Myrick, excuse me.
Oh, okay.
Excuse
I
me,
thought we
Jane.
had a new person.
Okay, I'm sorry, Jane. Anyway, you know how that goes. I didn't have any questions at that time, but now I do. But it's not a question, it's more of a request, and I'm not sure whether this request is.
And where are you on your,
It has nothing to do
Oh,
with
okay.
anything specific. Yes, it does in a way. There's $202,000 on page 5 that, in Dr. Joe's memorandum, that he's proposing go for financial assistance for our students, and that nearly all of this will be going to the Soaring Eagle Scholarship. And this raises the request, and it's probably because of my continuing trying to figure out how financial assistance is provided to our students. Is it possible to get a breakdown of the different categories of students receiving financial assistance? Okay, we've got this, we've got the scholarships, we've got Perkins, we've got all these various types of things. And I would particularly be interested in some analysis of that, rather than what's projected, but what has happened for this past year. Is that something that you could?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Erickson, probably after the meeting, I'll have you chat with Vice President Hay, figure out the specific questions you're after. I can give you institutional perspective on the amount of institutional aid and state aid and grant aid. We get those reports from the from IPEDS. But when we get to specific populations and the specific amount of each type of award, that's going to take
Well,
some.
it's not only those the students who receive the awards, but also where it's coming from. What I think Carol mentioned at one of the finance committee meetings to me that 25% of the tuition has to go toward financial assistance. Am I correct with that? Amount?
About 25% is going towards.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, that's a source of money that is being used, and then how is that broken down to what groups? So, yeah, I'll get
Yeah,
to, you face me, you point to the right person, and I'll
Yeah.
talk to that person.
The short answer is yes, we can provide you that analysis. We just need to know the specific questions to ask, and I'm sure we can get you
I
the,
need some help in formulating
the
the
data.
question.
I'm sure Judy can do that.
Judy will help
Yep,
you.
you
All right.
bet.
Thank you. Trustee Mosier, more?
Well, I'll follow up with what Don was looking at, and I've got one other question there.
Okay.
On the scholarships, I understand and really appreciate that we have an opportunity here with need-based scholarships. And I think fellow trustee is kind of looking at the same thing I'm wondering, and that is, how do we make the determination that there is a need, and how do we then address that need? How's that process work? Secondly, you know, we've got the need-based scholarships, we have merit scholarships, but from personal experience in talking with other folks that I also know, I'm not sure that we have some system that would allow for it, but there are a number of folks who fall through the crack that are above the need, so they have no access to grants. And you can see, I'm looking at a group there that, you know, they're not in a higher income, they're not low enough income, they're caught in that squeeze in the middle. Is there any way we could look at some possibility, and I don't know how, I'm not creative enough to come up with that, but it would sure be nice if we could help those folks. And I know we're not in the business of helping everyone, but there's some folks who that really impacts them also, and they kind of get left out.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Mosier, I'll take a stab at describing how we do this, and then Judy can correct me if I'm off base. But that essentially is the methodology in which we're looking at the Soaring Eagle for a significant population. And so what we look at is we look at individuals that have unmet need. And when we say that, we look at individuals that have a certain estimated family contribution, have Pell, and have things. And if they have a gap between the cost of tuition fees and books, but they don't have grant aid, they don't have whatever it is to cover that, and yet they fall in that, typically that lower middle class analysis, then that's what we try to fill. We try to fill that gap with this need-based aid. Am I pretty close? It pretty close, not close enough, okay. And even with the adult, wasn't very convincing. Because that's what we're recognizing, especially for our adult students and those, you know, if you're a traditional age student and you've gone through high school recently and you come out with Hathaway, if you do happen to apply for federal financial aid, which a small portion, as you've heard before, of our population does, you can fill that gap. But because Wyoming doesn't have a need-based aid program, outside of Pell, there really isn't anything. And there are cases where we'll have people who come that will have a gap even after Pell between tuition fees and books, and we're trying to fill that gap. And we're having even a larger conversation about whether or not, if we want to encourage non-traditional students to go full-time and not work off campus, should we be increasing more of on-campus work opportunities, and should we be considering the cost of living in part of that need analysis? And so we can have Julie Wilson come back, the Director of Financial Aid. She's got a pretty complex system that we drive out of Colleague and a matrices that we use to put people based on their estimated family contribution, their other incomes, their other aid programs, and then try to fill that gap. What we want to do is fill it enough that they don't have to take loans and try to discourage that. So we're using a process that will do that. One of the proposed programs is actually going to be targeting adult students, whereas the Soaring Eagle is targeting, I think, mainly first-generation students. And
Yeah, it starts with first generation and then goes into adult students, and it kind of ratchets up with how much money we have available
to do that. So happy to have her come back and talk about that, but they've really implemented a pretty strong system to look at all those components and figure out how do we fill that gap, even when, based on grant aid or other considerations, you know, people would say that you can pay for it. We know that there are some of those families that just fall in that gap, where even paying for that gap is cumbersome. And so we're trying to fill that, and at the same time trying to get them to go more full-time and keep making adequate progress. And this investment in scholarship is going to make a big dent, I think, in what we can do for that population.
Madam Chair,
I'm frightened by how much you must have gotten into my head, because you said what I wish I could have said.
If you're afraid.
Because you refine, because you refine really what I'm searching for, that particular group that falls between the cracks. But I wanted to know how we're doing it now, and how the money is being distributed across the board, and you started doing it there. And so I will get together.
in the essence of timeliness.
Yes,
That's a
I'm-
great idea to talk to Judy.
Yes.
And I know Sage Trio also fills a bit of that gap, and so there are other places that a student can ask for money or be helped. So I think Judy is the person to talk to, and maybe if we need to know more as a board, you can report it back, or maybe Judy can come back and let
Yeah.
us know.
I'll keep it to myself.
Well, then we'll count on Judy.
Good.
Thank you.
Good
I really liked all these questions. They were very interesting, and you have one more. Okay,
Yep, the last one.
okay.
Before I ask the last question, I would like to say that Jane has been wonderful in terms of, I had a lot more questions, so she saved you a lot of time. Because I got those answered ahead of schedule, and that was really helpful. But the last question I have is on contingency. We have how much money in either reserve or contingency, and can you tell me how we now are looking at that? Because I think we used to look a little more at saying we had a reserve account and that was it. And I know Jane helped me understand some of this today, but I'm just looking broadly. We have one place in plant where we have contingency. And then I'm wondering where else, in other words, operating funds, how much reserve money do we have? How much reserve money do we have in plant? And does that then cover all the reserves?
Madam Chair, Trustee Mosier, I'll take a stab at it and then let Carol fill in the gaps. We actually have different types of quote-unquote reserves. The two probably most significant are the fund balances that we have with the 1 mil fund as well as the general fund. And those are balances that can build if we have revenue above expenditures, and oftentimes come in handy when we need to replace a major roof and have to pull out of. We have also tried to, at least for the last few years, create a contingency reserve within the operating fund, and they haven't been large amounts. You know, this year it's $267,000. It's been as high as I think $400,000 we started last year. Those are really more of operating fund reserves, and they're really targeted towards enrollment reserves. You know, we budget fixed expenditures, and we use tuition as one of the revenue sources to set those budgets. If we were to have a significant dip or change or something happen in enrollment, we have funds within the current fund that could backfill that to basically take care of the things we've committed to spending on already, even though our tuition revenue may not be there. So we have those three types of reserves. I'll let you talk to the plant reserves, the contingency funds within there.
Okay, I think, Madam Chair and Trustee Mosier, I think that you're confusing and probably need to use different words. The contingency reserve in the plant fund is really the coal lease bonus money that we get. So it's not the same kind of reserve. The reserves in the operating fund are, we're anticipating managing a change in the assumptions that we've made. This is actual dollars that we receive that don't have the same restrictions as the major maintenance money has. It's depending upon the formula that the state uses, because we're kind of down at the bottom of the pecking order of getting that funding. But we have in the past received some of it. But if maybe a better term for that one is coal lease bonus money, and it's actually funds that we receive from the state. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay.
And then broadly, Madam Chair, just more of a statement than a question. When I look at, and perhaps next time when we look at this, when we do the comparison of the 7 colleges, as I talked to Jane about that today, we're under, the commission sets out now how we report some of that. So that it sounds to me like we're pretty darn consistent in how we classify those monies into whether it's institutional support or academic, whereas perhaps even as short a time as a year ago, that budget did not have as correct, let's say, relationship. One school might have one person whose salary is $200,000 located over, or they'd record them as academic rather than institutional support or something like that. But that's cleaned up. So when I look at this statewide, my statement really is more of, we're looking at the same thing amongst all colleges, where in the past, some of that was kind of caught in shifting sands.
Madam Chair, Trustee Mosier, that is correct. If you'll recall, when this formula came out the last biennia, that there was large discrepancies, and so the Administrative Services Council, so my counterparts across the state got together because the contention was that we were comparing apples to oranges. And so we have all agreed now how we're classifying the kind of gray area, and academic deans are one of those, and libraries and things like that. So assuming that everyone is classifying them the way that we agreed to do that, your statement is correct.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Any other questions? And with that, we will finish this discussion on the budget for this evening, but it will be ongoing. If anyone has any questions or comments, they can call either Jane or Carol or Dr. Schaefer. Right?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Additional items, historical list of board motions. Next meeting is May 7th. In the meantime, we have that employee recognition awards and reception that Melissa Gallant has sent us an invitation, which is on the table. I hope that most of us can attend that. I'd really enjoy that special event. And then we have a May 21st meeting, and then we have new business. Is there any new business before this board? What is this?
No,
Trust-
ignore me. I'll,
Okay, I'm ignoring you.
may I approach the chair?
Privately? Thank you, Ed, for reminding me. So if there is no new business, we have time for public comment on anything not on the agenda. Dr. Goyal.
Good evening, Madam Trustee. I have some observation based on what I have heard here. I want to thank you to allow me to come here and make some comments. I'll keep in three different areas my comments. One will be based on my previous comments that I have made in the past. I have requested many different things to this board, and I have yet to hear any response back, either from the board or from the administration or in public domain, all the answers to, or any of the answers to those questions. So my question to the board is, if, as a member of the public, am I expecting to just only raise questions or observations or never hear any response back, or am I expected to hear anything back, responses? I do not know the process here, but that's the one thing I would like to hear from your comment. Second thing is, I was hearing President talk about the budget and the numbers, and I quickly looked at this book. And looking at the train data going down, and some of the data that I've seen was about 20% decrease in FTE or number of students or whatever number one I've seen. And if we have, and very first meeting that I made observation about a Apple computer and the board and a business, I made that comparison, and 5% increase or 4% increase in student tuition, bringing back to only 200,000 back to student scholarship, going back to the same revenue pool. Again, coming to the revenue source. And understanding is that next 1 year, we may see an increase or reversal of this decrease, but really look at the Laramie County, not look at the Wyoming itself, the county in which we serve. We are looking at a trend and the data by reversal or any change shift in demographics by 2020 and 2023. So I'm just wondering if this board has critically looked at those numbers and demographic changes based on the entire population of this county, or they're basing the calculation on Wyoming or the national trend set data. That's a very important thing to remember, because we are in this county, that's where we serve. So we need to really look very traditionally, very critically, starting from who's entering our kindergarten, what is our population, what is trend set, what population moving in the what offering we are going to do, what kind of population has moved in last 10 years in this county, or what kind of population moved out, and what are the other potential for this state. So we have to do all this analysis, and they really look very critically, and then do the demographic trend analysis. And I will really encourage this board to or whosoever, to really talk to the demographic people or economists in the state as well as the federal level to really find out the very specific issue, which I, in my research, is 20, 22, and 23. That's where we start going to look into something if all the economic projections are going to really work out the way we are working it out right now. So this is the observation I would like to make to this board. So it's not that easy that's going to start tomorrow. So please do some research on that. So having looked at the numbers, where we came from 2-3 years ago biennium, where we are coming now, decrease in the number of students, and looking at the business, why we need the same number of dollars to operate. That's the question. It's a public money. I encourage board to really ask these questions. Why, if I needed $100,000 to run a department X, why still I need $100,000 when I don't have 20% student? How we can package and repackage those classes that we used to offer. It's not about 10 or 12 as Trustee Kilty has mentioned. It's not about 10 and 12 because I know this college has worked very diligently, not worrying about 10 and 12, but work differently.
Dr. Goyal, I would like to let you know that you have 5 minutes left.
You never
Just
told me that how much time I had to start with.
Well, you had 10 minutes and
No,
you've
but you
had,
never told me to start with.
I will not argue with you. You have 5 minutes. Don't burn it up arguing. So go ahead, please.
All right, I will, so the another thing is that question was raised about $57,000 A&P models, large models. This is the digital age. The whole world is moving differently. I would like to encourage the board looking into where the rest of the world is moving, why we are going backward, 10 years behind. The whole lab system is changing. I mentioned last meeting. The whole laboratory is 30 years behind. We are changing in different world. Why we want to buy these models, for what? We are not even teaching A and P. We are only teaching A in this college. So very important thing for this board to remember. Also, something that I brought to the attention of this board last meeting, that faculty member has been retaliated against. I want board to know that. It's unfortunate that some issue that has been brought by public to this board and that faculty member had been retaliated against. That's very unfortunate. Developmental math education, all these changes, what we have talked about it, we have absolutely zero so far in any domain to understand what is happening here. We have no data in the past, no data in the forward, and as far as KPI, strategic plan is concerned, as Kevin, Trustee Kilty mentioned, I encourage the trust board to please put everything for the public to look at it. I would like everybody to look at it because these are a copy-paste. All those document copy-paste, 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 no relationship with where the strategic plan is, what it is, or whether you can buy a $200 a chair for the physics lab. These things are very important things. We don't want to invest in $200 chair that is not going to last even 6 months. So, I'm just making a very little points. Board is going to approve something, please, just don't approve it. Look at it very carefully, put everything out there. Let public look at it, come back to you, advise you what is right, what is wrong. That's all I want to say.
Thank you very much.
Don't look at me like this, please, kindly. I'm just telling you, please don't look at me like this.
Dr. Goyal, please leave the room. Please. Okay, you may sit there for now. Okay. We, if we have no other public comment,
Madam Chair, I propose that we take a brief break and then reconvene to discuss a matter in executive session regarding legal matters.
a personnel issue.
Need a second?
Yes, a second, please. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. We'll take a 5-minute break. We have a person here who needs to leave at around 10, so if we could be speedy here, it would be very good. Thank you. So we'll reconvene about 20